Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 350 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game.
Question for the audience. Are you building your business on hope or on a rock-solid legal foundation that actually fuels your growth? Jon is here to show you how having a fractional general counsel isn't just smart, it's essential. He'll dive into why waiting for legal problems to show up is a losing game and how proactive, predictable legal support can make scaling, selling, and thriving way easier for startups and business owners. Our guest today is Jon Hood. Jon is the founder of Jon Hood Law, where he helps businesses by acting more like a partner than a traditional outside lawyer. Before launching his firm in 2014, Jon served as general counsel for an early-stage ed tech startup, where he learned how valuable it is to be part of a leadership team from the beginning, not just when the problems arise. His firm follows an in-house model, offering clients three major advantages: proactive legal guidance, predictable flat fee billing instead of stressful hourly rates, and better preparation for major transactions like sales, purchases, or investments. Outside of work, Jon enjoys quoting the Big Lebowski, much to his wife's patient endurance. When he's not practicing law, he's busy managing an urban farm filled with dogs, cats, and rabbits, along with regular fosters who keep him on his toes. Jon, it is a pleasure to have you here today, sir. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
What's your tagline for your business, sir?
Our tagline is attorneys who say yes, which fits into the in-house business model, which I know we'll get into.
So what is fractional general counsel? And how is it different than, let's say, hiring a law firm or, there are other services, there are other firms out there that hire where you can subscribe and get a monthly fee to have certain types of coverage? What's the differentiator?
Yeah, it's a great question. I worked at a firm in law school, so I got familiar with the law firm model of, you have obviously a bunch of different clients. They bring you in typically when there's a problem, maybe they get sued, maybe there's a regulatory issue they have to deal with, but you're kind of acting a little bit more as a mercenary where you go in, solve a problem, and then you're back on ice until there's another problem. The in-house counsel's role is to monitor everything going on in the business, whether it's purely legal or not, and identify where there are risks and opportunities. So we play that role for smaller companies where they don't have the budget or the need for somebody 40, 50 hours a week on staff as their lawyer, but we're plugging into their executive team, we're plugging into their other non-legal executives and making sure that they're covered from a legal perspective and thinking about things that might not occur to them otherwise.
One thing that interests me is how the word fractional, I heard it first CFO, Chief Fractional Officer. One could have a lawyer on a retainer. One could have duty counsel. One could have a man he has breakfast with every week. What made fractional a term that carried its own weight?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. When I started my firm in 2014 and I had just begun at that point meeting, I think the first fractional I ever met was a fractional COO. And I kind of was like, I don't even know what that means. And as I got further into doing this work and working with other fractionals, I said, that's kind of what we're doing. We do have clients where we act more as a traditional firm. So they bring us in for one project, or maybe we help them set up a company and then they go on their way. But for the companies where we work with them day in, day out, we're really doing the same thing that a fractional CFO does, except we're doing it for legal. We're not on salary. We have other clients, but we are taking a more overarching approach and working with their other fractionals. What I find a lot of times is if somebody has a fractional CFO or COO and they keep them, they like the model, they understand the model, and begin building out their executive team with other fractional people, and allows them to scale more quickly and certainly much more inexpensively.
So if you're a small business and you're starting up, based on what we're understanding right now, you should have that legal advice as you're warming up. What are the particular areas that most small businesses need that type of attention to detail, legal detail?
Yeah, it depends in large part on the type of the industry you're in and sort of what your plans are. But early on, when a company starts needing this work, it's usually some combination of they're hiring people, so they need help with employment agreements, employment compliance, making sure all their payroll and everything is set up properly. a corporate governance. So it could be from the very beginning, they know they want to set the company up a certain way and they need help structuring it for taking investment, buying or selling in other companies. A lot of tech software companies know they want to get investment from private equity or venture capital. They start thinking about that early. Similarly, somebody might say, listen, 5, 6 years from now, I want to sell my business. It's not around the corner, but I want to start preparing for it. Those are the things that are most typically at the top of their list early on. And then you also have, intellectual property. They want to protect their own. They want to make sure they're not infringing somebody else's IP. And then a lot of just kind of, it sounds boring, but contract review management, right? They're getting these 60, 70-page agreements, especially as you get bigger, you start getting bigger clients and they start sending you these more and more outrageous master service agreements and things that you can't even begin to pick through. So that's typically where we come in.
Are you telling me that you read the EULA agreements all the way through from Apple?
And this is really going to make you hate me. I not only read those, sometimes we write those. For Apple, we write a lot of those privacy policies, all that stuff that, like you said, no consumer in their right mind ever reads.
Just a quick sidebar before I release the mic over to Wayne. When someone is getting this privacy policy or I'm getting this EULA document sent to me, it's not mine, it's someone else's. Do you read through it or run it through AI to sort it out and then pick out the parts? Or you just mentioned master agreement and it's many pages long, right? How, is that 3 hours or is there a template or standards? I'm kind of trying to feel out the answer here.
No, the sad reality is that we do actually read through them. We don't use AI for that because there are privacy concerns around putting, confidential information into AI. Sometimes clients will ask me to review an agreement that I'm not as familiar with. I have an attorney on my team who can help with commercial leases. I don't really do that very much. I have read through commercial leases a couple times and I'm not familiar with them. So it's almost like a layperson trying to read it. But with these other agreements, NDAs, MSAs, I'm so used to the terms that it's like when you're driving. Have you ever been driving and then 20 minutes goes by and you realize you kind of zoned out, but you were paying attention? The language is so predictable that if something is there that shouldn't be, it'll pop out and my brain turns back on. But the rest of it, you read through it, you know if it's standard or not, and then you flag the things that aren't.
Not all entrepreneurs are drivers, but many of them are. One thing about drivers is they know everything about their business and they won't let you tell them anything else. And they only call the lawyer after the train wreck happens. If you could see from what you've seen in your general overview, what are the train wrecks and how do you avoid them before they happen?
It's unfortunate because it's a little bit like you always think that you won't get into a car accident, right? Like you said, you see car accidents all over the road. You're like, yeah, but I'm a careful driver. That's not going to happen to me. And then lo and behold, some 18-wheeler T-bones you or whatever. So it's a little bit like financial advisors are there to tell you when to sell your stock and when not to, because you can't really trust your own intuition. The things that most often come up in an early to mid-stage company are IP disputes. So you might unintentionally be infringing someone else's intellectual property if you haven't done a clearance search for your name or logo or other brand elements you're using. You might have somebody else who did some work for you and they took some of the intellectual property and they're starting their own, company with it, and you need to try to make a claim against them. A lot of people, when they get ready to start selling their business, haven't done the legwork of getting the diligence ready. That is a big ask if you're even 6 or 12 months out from a transaction, especially if you're $1 million plus company. There's a lot to pull together. Employment is such a complex area of the law because it's also state specific. So if you have employees, here in the States in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different places or overseas, that can get away from you quickly, especially as you scale. So I'd say those are the 3 biggest issues where people come to us with their hair on fire. And then you have the more run of the mill, my co-founder is not pulling their weight and I want to get rid of them. What do I do about that? Or just, again, kind of the more boring governance issues of I want to, restructure my cap table to get ready for this investment and the other little things that come along with growing a business.
Even though I asked about fractional, I'm actually going to answer your core point from actually living it. I had a lawyer. I asked a question. They gave me an answer. 2 weeks passed. I got a 15-minute incremental bill that probably took them an hour and a half to write the bill. And I was furious. So tell me, how would a flat monthly fee be less stressful?
I'll tell you, again, as somebody who never worked, even the law firm I worked at in law school was a plaintiff side consumer class action firm. So it was one of those firms where they get a percentage of whatever they recover. So we didn't have the big firms. That's how they run, right? Like you said, 15-minute increments. You get your bill for a phone call, your bill for an email. I frankly hate doing that. We have clients that we work with on an hourly basis, and we're here. It's April 30th. Yeah, I'm like, it's the end of the month. I got to do my friggin' invoices again. You know, it never ends. So the nice thing about the flat fee is that it makes things simpler for the client and for us. It makes it budgetable. You call your lawyer, you email your lawyer, you have a meeting with them. It's all included in the fee. One of the reasons I really started trying to encourage clients to take advantage of the monthly fee is for exactly that reason. I've had clients in the past where they're paying hourly and they come to me and say, a couple months ago, things were really tight. I didn't want to call you because I didn't want to get a bill for it, but I signed this contract. I didn't read it and now I can't get paid. And now, lo and behold, you have a mess that you have to untangle. I encourage my clients to, if you have a 10-hour monthly package with us, you're going to use the 10 hours because I know that if I'm paying a flat fee for 10 hours, I'm going to use it. So they're going to call, they're going to email, they're going to make sure that we're looped in. It's a good way to incentivize people to deal with these issues before they metastasize into much bigger problems.
You mentioned something about having a team of lawyers and knowing it from the medical side of the universe, like if you're a general practitioner, your family doc, right? And they'll go, you got something peculiar. I got to send you off to and pick the specialty you want or have to go to. And usually the rates and the fees are different. So if you're talking about here's a contract versus doing mergers and acquisitions or a non-disclosure agreement, or I got to build a shareholder agreement, or even more so, have a tax litigation or a tax law, which is getting a little more unique. Is that kind of covered within that flat fee model, or is it covered?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So our core team is comprised of myself. We have an employment attorney, an intellectual property attorney who does patents, trademarks, copyrights, licensing, all that stuff. An entertainment attorney. We do occasionally get creators and other people where there are royalties and things involved that are a little bit more bespoke. We also have another corporate and pre-litigation attorney. Litigation is not included in the flat monthly fee. Clients deal with disputes all the time, right? They're not getting paid under contract. They have IP disputes or whatever. So we can handle all of that within that flat monthly fee. Like you said, I look at myself as a general practitioner doctor. And if you need to bring in a specialist, tax lawyer, litigation counsel, specialized counsel in another area, that could be an additional charge for the client, but we'll clear it with them and make sure we have, I always try to scope stuff, even if it's an hourly rate to the outside counsel. I say, what do you think the maximum amount of time this is going to take? Then you go back to the client, you get approval. He said, it's going to be 5 hours. If we get to 5 hours, we need more time. We're going to stop and clear it with you again. What I do not want for the client and for my own blood pressure is I don't want to get the angry email that says, what the hell is this? It's not good for the client and not good for our relationship with them.
Yeah. My big overarching question is, it seems there are no late night procedurals about incorporation. It's always murders and thefts. What about law and order? Getting incorporated. Oh, Dick Wolf.
Maybe you're onto something here. My director of operations has been pushing, she follows personal injury lawyers on TikTok who do interesting videos about, like you said, there's a car accident, who's at fault. And it is interesting because it's kind of riveting. And she said, yeah, you could do that. I said, maybe there is a way to make corporate law riveting, but I haven't come up with it yet. So maybe we should call Dick Wolf and see what he thinks.
I think the consequent management piece, I didn't get my NDA in place. Now look at this, my secret sauce is not so secret.
Exactly. Maybe we have something here. We could start like a film production company or something.
There's real world examples out there of how your clients have saved money. Can you walk us through that? Share some insights? Because much like not having insurance, when things go sideways, you now have an incurred expense.
The insurance is such a good example of that because it's like, is your house going to catch fire? Probably not. The odds are against your house catching fire. But if it does and you don't have insurance, you're going to be destroyed. Unless you are very independently wealthy, you're not going to have the money to rebuild. Even if you do, you're going to lose a bunch of priceless stuff. You may get injured, right? There's a lot of really pretty significant risk. So that's how I encourage my clients to think about legal. And again, if you're starting a business, if you're at the early stages of it, it's completely understandable and reasonable from my perspective to not pour a ton of money into legal because you don't know if the business is going to succeed or not, right? You got to go out, you got to get customers, you got to build a product, build a service. So I do not ever encourage people to engage with us on a monthly basis until they consistently need at least 10 hours of legal services a month. That's kind of the sweet spot when the monthly comes into view. A lot of our monthly clients we work with on an hourly basis, and then they graduate into that. There's some things early on that are, I think, the most important, which is entity setup. So again, if you're starting a widget company, once you start producing and selling widgets, there's liability, right? You might get sued by a client who hurts themselves with the widget. You might get screwed by the widget, manufacturer, distributor. You want to make sure that you have the legal structure in place. Again, intellectual property. It's important to protect your own IP. I think in some ways it's even more important to make sure that you're not infringing someone else's IP. I've had clients where they named a business a certain name, and years later, they get a letter from a much more well-capitalized competitor that's, in my opinion, not really that similar, but they have the money and the resources to fight it. They say, you better change your name or we're going to come after you. That's expensive to do. If you're running something that produces physical product, even if it's just a service provider, you have a lot of goodwill built up into that name, so that's an expensive proposition. Employment stuff is so easy to hire people. I actually think they make it a little too easy to call up ADP, put the person on payroll, and then a year later, you're like, oh, I never had disability insurance. Was I supposed to have that? And you get some notice from New York State that says you owe $50,000 in penalties. So it's this stuff you don't think about. And understandably, you don't think about because you think about a million other things can really come back to bite you and you really pay through the nose for it.
Here in Canada, apparently a CRA, our version of IRS, you are deemed to be, you think the person's a contractor and they're deemed to be an employee, and then the employee puts in a claim. CRA assumes that you're guilty and you've screwed up. They're asking you for information, but it's the final swan.
Right.
One other quick question. Assuming your business gets super popular.
Yeah.
One of the things I understand lawyers can't do, much like realtors, you can't be on both sides of the fence. You can't be both ends of the stick. You only be one end of the stick. So you have two clients showing up and they're going to litigate each other and they're your clients. What do you do? Even if it's not litigation, they're pointing at each other and then using you as the stick.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever, I'm trying to think. I've had a couple situations where clients I work with are going to do a joint venture or something. So there is a conflict there of I've represented both of you. Some of those conflicts are waivable. You can tell them the risks of having us represent both of you. If you knowingly assume the risk, we can do it. In a litigation or a dispute situation like that, we certainly would not really touch it. And I think we'd probably have to refer the entire thing out to other firms, have other firms represent both of them. But we do have a conflict check every time we get a contract from somebody, make sure that we haven't, inadvertently represented the person on the other side of the contract. As you get more and more clients, that's just bound to happen. It's a numbers game eventually.
That's a good problem now, though, right?
It is. It's like paying more in taxes. It's a bummer, but that means you made more money. So it's all good.
People are so afraid of paying taxes. That means you made money.
Hey, exactly. That's a good problem. Would you rather owe nothing because you made nothing,
Somebody hires you.
Yeah.
And they say, I want you as my fractional counsel. 60 to 90 days pass. And you're sitting there and having a cup of coffee with them. And it's relaxed. What are their surprises? What occurred to them that never have occurred to them? And they're telling you about it.
Well, I think understandably, when you're running a business, especially a newer business, you're really focused on the 5-year plan or whatever, that you eventually want to sell or bring investors on, but you're really not focused on a few years down the road because you're trying to make sure that your company's profitable and that you can scale. So there are a lot of levers we can pull to make the longer term planning easier for clients. It's just something they haven't thought about. An example of that is where I do bring in tax counsel to advise on this because I know just enough about it to be dangerous. But here in the States, there's something called a qualified small business stock. If you structure your company as a C corporation, there are certain tax advantages, but you have to hold the stock for, I believe, 5 years. If there are tax savings that can come from the qualified small business stock exemption, you know that if you're going to sell your business 5 years from now, you better sort of take advantage of that soon. And again, just longer term planning of, how to structure the entity. People say, I'm going to set up a New York LLC and then I'll try to raise money from venture capital. We'll tell them it probably makes sense to just go ahead and do a Delaware Corp because you're almost certainly going to have to convert to that structure later. So let's do it now. It's trying to leverage our collective experience working with companies over the last 10 plus years and putting it to work for them before it becomes like a real, oh crap, we got to do this in the next 2 months to make this work.
Are there particular states that offer, like you mentioned Delaware.
Yeah.
But I also understand in the Western US, Northwestern US, there are other states that are also optimal for registering your corporation. Is that true or is that?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what you're looking for. Delaware has historically been the go-to because they have a relatively low corporate tax rate. And so they have all these companies set up there. As a result, they have a chancery court that hears exclusively corporate-related disputes. They have a very well-established corporate law. So it's relatively predictable. There's a lot of guidance around how a given dispute will turn out. In the last decade or so, Wyoming has emerged as a good state, especially for LLCs, because they have a very good system if you want to keep the ownership confidential. So people use that for, I haven't actually personally dealt with this, but I think a lot of crypto people set up their entities out there because then you can't find out who owns Crypto One LLC or whatever. And Nevada also out in the West has become sort of an emerging state, especially for LLCs, for kind of similar reasons. Just a more optimal structure. Investors tend to like Delaware because they think it's predictable. I've seen a little bit of reconsideration by some of them. A lot of them are actually, I've had a couple of transactions where clients are selling their company and the buyer wants to set up a Delaware LLC as opposed to a Delaware C Corp, mostly for tax reasons. So it's becoming less true that the Delaware C Corp is the go-to for those types of folks.
We talk to a lot of small businesses. People are buying you.
Yeah.
And people are buying you under supervision, so you could have a junior. But one thing I don't understand is that means if you're selling time, you could have 6 to 10 clients and then you're stuck. Somebody gets an IPO and becomes a $100 million company. Do they hire legal counsel? Do they hire you? How does that work?
Yes, we're scaling ourselves, right? There's only so many hours in the day. I've built out a team over the last few years to help with the increased volume. Once a business gets to a certain point, and it really depends in large part on the industry and kind of what they're doing, but they're going to want a full-time in-house counsel. So it's certainly an IPO in and of itself is such a monstrous undertaking. They're going to need regulatory counsel and people familiar with the SEC. And once they're public, they're going to need, full-time in-house counsel and probably eventually a whole legal team in-house. Similarly, company gets to, it depends, but 30, 50 million. A private company, they're going to be in the same boat, right? They're going to need somebody full-time, and then maybe they'll consult with us as outside counsel. They get to a point where they're ready to spread their wings and get a proper general counsel, not a fractional. Yeah.
So one of the things we've come across, people understand a few things, and then every once in a while there are pockets of information, blind spots. You see that in insurance, you see that in cybersecurity. What are most risks that you're finding that clients are not paying attention to? And more importantly, are there certain businesses where you probably want to shy away from them because the risk factor might be, well, this is going to be a dog's breakfast. How do you go, okay, here you go, you're simple, you're making widgets as opposed to you're running a adult entertainment site, like in better words.
Yeah, there are definitely, one of the things I look at when I talk to a new client or a new prospective client is, like you said, is it a risky business? And it's a little bit of a reductive phrase, but like you said, if you're doing widget manufacturing, business consulting is a relatively low risk endeavor, right? Certainly you could be sued by a client for, oh, you gave me bad advice and I had a bad outcome or whatever. That's not fun, but it's relatively run of the mill. Crypto is so new and defined in the legal world that it's a very moving target. I've had clients trying to figure out, and we don't do a ton of crypto work, but we've done some of it is, is it a security, right? If it's a security, then there's all kinds of hoops you have to jump through. There's a high risk that if you get that wrong, then you could be, you could be in some trouble, have to pay some money. And just anything that requires a lot of insurance, running a gym, running a restaurant. Somebody comes into your restaurant, they get food poisoning and get very sick, you're going to be sued. Investment properties, you have an Airbnb with a pool, God forbid somebody falls in the pool and drowns, that's a big risk. I always tell people you want to have as many layers of protection, regardless if you're in high risk or low risk industries. Set up an entity, set up a good contract with your customers, your vendors, but also have good insurance that covers all those eventualities. You might want to have cybersecurity insurance, professional general liability. You want to layer on top as many things as you can to protect your personal assets in the worst case scenario.
Jon, I do coaching as a day gig. When I'm talking to clients, I always get them back to when they're 8 years old or something. They always want to be a fireman or an astronaut. Tell me your origin story. How did Jon Hood want to become a lawyer? And tell me your story.
Oh my God. I'm trying to remember what I wanted to be as a kid. The story of how I became a lawyer is really not as exciting as a lot of other lawyers. I was a psychology major in undergrad. I thought maybe I wanted to be a research psychologist or a therapist, but I decided I'll graduate college, I'll move to a big fun city and see what I can find there. And so I moved to New York. I went to a small liberal arts college in central Virginia and wanted to get a taste of the city life. So I moved up to New York. I worked as an office manager at a training company for a year. And then I started to say, all right, how can I advance my career, do something meaningful? And like a lot of people who don't quite know what they want to do, I said, maybe I'll apply to law school. So I did that. That was in 2007. I started law school. So I was able to ride out the recession. I graduated in 2011, and it turns out a lot of other people had the same idea. So I graduated into just a glut of lawyers coming out of law school and looking for work. And believe it or not, I originally wanted to be a public defender, and all of the big firms were deferring. They had offered people jobs and put those on ice, but paid them for a year to work for legal aid and all these other public interest entities. There were no public interest jobs available. I ended up working for this ed tech company started by a friend of mine. The first night I worked for him, he paid me $50 to stand outside a public school and hand out flyers to parents going for an information night that said, come check out our ed tech website with these educational resources. And he ended up needing initially kind of non-legal help with content and some other operations stuff. And then as his company grew, he was hiring people, he was getting contracts. We helped with that. Eventually I said, why don't I stay on as your general counsel and I'll help you with some operations stuff as well. That's how I got into this space. After a couple of years there, I saw an opportunity to provide that same type of service to other companies. So I started my firm in 2014 and here we are.
It's interesting. Most people, that's how businesses start up. When you first roll up and have a career aspiration and then life takes you on a new path. When you're helping a company to either raise capital or secure investment or, and I've been made aware of a couple of things when this all happens. Are you structured? Do you have your story? Do you have to be able to pitch it? And then the people that come knocking on the door, do you vet them? Do you help structure the company and make sure the paperwork's in alignment? And then do you vet the people knocking on the door so you're not letting in something that's not ideal for you? You really have to be hungry for that option. Let's go something safe that won't pillage your assets.
I mean, a lot of people we talk to are not quite ready for a fractional general counsel, and some of them may not even need a lawyer yet, right? Like I said, they might be, I'm thinking about starting a company. I'm still at my full-time job. It may be 6 to 12 months before we start. So we'll have a conversation with them, keep our name on file and give us a call when you need us. A lot of them, it's let's set up your LLC or set up your corporation and off you go, try to get the company up and running and then come back to us. Once you do, we'll take a look at step 2. So we try to be very strategic in advising clients when and how to engage us. It's not going to help anybody if somebody signs up for 10 hours a month and they're using 2. That doesn't help us. That doesn't help them. And it's not a good fit. So we try to grow with our clients. A lot of times, like I said, we'll talk to somebody, we'll tell them you don't really need a lawyer yet. And then 2 or 3 years later, maybe we hear from them, maybe they say, hey, my friend here is starting their own company. They'd like to talk to you. I try to help people as much as I can. And a lot of times that means we have a half-hour call and go on our separate ways. They'll hit us up again if and when they need to.
Something I'm really interested by, your tagline, attorneys that say yes.
Yeah.
I find our culture, it's like HR. They believe that attorneys and HR managers are there to say no and it should be avoided at all costs. Tell me about a mindset change of attorneys who say yes.
Yeah, so that's been my experience too. And again, I don't want to come off as denigrating lawyers who work at law firms. They're great. But I think a lot of them have the mindset, again, understandably, of trying to minimize risk as much as possible, right? I deal with this with other attorneys a lot. You get a contract back and it's got a million edits on relatively minor things, and presumably they're trying to get rid of all the risk. And certainly we can do that, and we don't assume risk without telling our clients about it. But my mindset is, if you're an early stage company, chances are you're probably not going to make it. So you're trying to get money in the door and grow the company. You're going to be more comfortable with risk than bigger, more established companies. I always try to give my clients the option. If I say, look, here's the range of outcomes. Let's say we have a contract and it's got a provision that is really opens you up to, decent amount of risk. I try to not allow my clients to sell the farm to get a deal. But are you willing to take on this risk to get this big client, which could take you to the next level? Here's the ways it could go wrong. Here's the ways it could go right. You tell me what you're comfortable with. And if they're comfortable with it and informed, then we're willing to do that for them. And I think the culture and the way that we're trained is to not allow that risk in the door. But I think for early stage companies, they need somebody who says, we can do that, but let's walk through all the ways. There could be downsides if we go that route. So that's the mindset we try to bring. And I think it does differentiate us.
Jon, something about your profession is that you're only legally allowed certain places. What is your geography and how do we reach you?
It's a great question. We have clients all over. We don't do any litigation. We're transactional lawyers and advisors. There are very few scenarios where we say, oh, that's not something we can handle. There are situations, right? You need a Colorado employment lawyer or whatever, almost certainly going to refer you to somebody in state. But if you're sitting in California, you have a Delaware corporation and you have employees all over, there's a good chance that we can help. If there are local legal issues, we'll bring in local counsel to advise. Especially since COVID, the world has gotten more comfortable with Zoom. We have clients who live overseas and have U.S. businesses. We'll help them with their U.S. operations and then work with their overseas counsel to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction. It's really been great. I'm in San Francisco this week meeting a few clients who are either live in San Francisco or are here for a conference who I've never gotten a chance to meet in person. One of them lives in Australia. We've done a bunch of Zoom. So it's cool. Most of my clients I never see in person. So this is like a rare throwback to the way things used to be where I'm actually meeting people for coffee.
So if someone's trying to reach you, sir.
Absolutely. Our website is Jon Hood, JONHOODESQ.com, like Esquire. I'm also on LinkedIn, Hood Venture Counsel, Jon Hood on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk to people. Drop me a line. Happy to have a call and talk through. If you have questions or you're thinking about setting up a business, I'm always willing to take some time and talk that through.
I want to say thank you to Jon Hood, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. If you're starting up a company, Jon's the person to reach out to. If you need to do fractional, have fractional general counsel. He's there. You want to know more about managing urban farms and rescued animals? Jon knows this stuff too, but his focus is on the power of proactive care and planning, and that's the key element here.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayneemotive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; Jovan Strika from A Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space; then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer, please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The host of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.